Hi, and good morning. I'm Gloria Lean, President of the Arizona Federation of Music Clubs, and it's wonderful to have you here to celebrate our centennial. 100 years is a long time, and we weren't sure how we'd be meeting this year. Originally it was going to be April 26th, then we moved it to October 24th. The end of August we decided maybe we should do this virtually instead of live, and I'm glad we're doing it this way. My thanks to Valerie Harris for all the work that she's put into this, as well as the rest of my committee who will be named later. The beginnings started way back in 1893. Dr. Theodore Thomas and his wife, Rose Fay, had moved to Chicago. He became the conductor of the Chicago Symphony, and he was asked to put together music for the World's Columbian Exposition, which is another word for the World's Fair. He encouraged his wife, Rose Fay, to ask some of her friends that were in different music clubs throughout the country to come to Chicago and enjoy themselves. She did, and 42 clubs came. They had such a good time that they decided they'd love to get together every year. So 5 years later, in 1898, the National Federation of Music Clubs was formally instituted, and Rose Fay became their first president. She was a leader not only in music, but she also became a president and was the first woman president of the Humane Society. At that time it was called the Anti-Cruelty to Animals. She was one of the only women who has been given a military funeral in 1929 because she assisted enlisted men as director of soldiers and sailors clubs. At this point, Arizona was still a territory, but they were known for their 5 C's: cotton, citrus, copper, climate, and cattle. On February 14th, 1912, Arizona became a state. It was known as the Valentine State because of the February 14th. Our nickname is the Grand Canyon State, and our flower is the saguaro. During the teens, suffrage was also a big thing. We were the 10th state to vote for it. When the 19th Amendment was ratified, 4 women legislators led the charge without a single dissenting vote in either house. This was 8 years before it was ratified nationwide. We've had through the years 4 women governors. I say this because Arizona has had a long history of respecting women as equals. In 1918, the Spanish flu epidemic hit. Finally, in 1920, the Arizona Federation of Music Clubs came into being, but they also dealt with the pandemic. One of our Mesa teachers, Blanche Mumford, married Clarkdale businessman Ralph Dickinson. It seemed no cloud would dare come to darken the fair sunshine of their wedded life, read an article in The Republic. But within months, Blanche would lose her husband and 2 family members, which included her sister and an uncle, to the flu epidemic. She was in Phoenix for her sister's funeral when she got word that her husband, who was up in Flagstaff, had just died. Blanche, who had quit teaching after she married, returned to work at Mesa schools that December. That June, she gave birth to her son, after 2 waves of influenza had hit the valley, and she remarried a year later. Blanche remained an active participant in the valley's music scene. She was a member of the Arizona Federation of Music Clubs and appeared in the Republic's pages until the 1930s for her singing. During that time, sometimes they met in the Phoenix House of Musicians or Musicians House, but sometimes, most of the time, they met in people's homes. At this time, churches and community choirs, bands, orchestras, as well as the Phoenix Orchestra was also federated. We had strong presidents from Phoenix, Douglas, Tucson, Scottsdale, Somerton, which is near Yuma, as well as Eloy, Ajo, Green Valley, etc. Our clubs were very active. The picture of Margaret Wheeler Ross, our first president, was written up as one of the 5 eminent women in Arizona. She was visited twice by Mrs. Sieberling, who is the National Federation president, encouraging her to start the Arizona Federation of Music Clubs. Once it was confirmed, one of their first meetings was held the first day of the state fair because people came from a distance, and it helped control the costs of transportation. She had great wit, humorous reminiscence. When she'd be at some of the national meetings, she would tell about what it's like to live out west in Prescott. And her husband, who was a lawyer, was now a representative in the legislature. And she said, sometimes it's so difficult to get from Prescott to Phoenix that he has to go all the way to Los Angeles to be able to get to the legislature in Phoenix. And of course, people ate it up. She also raised money by sponsoring a cowboy dance. Now, we haven't done that for probably 100 years. In 1922 to 24, also from Phoenix, was Mrs. Sims. She federated 11 more clubs. Her objective was to improve public school music. She also started a band at the Fort Grant Industrial School. And, this is interesting, in Bisbee, for the interscholastic music meet, they had 600 juniors. Pretty amazing. When we get to Mrs. Prescott, her pride and joy was working with a lot of juniors. And so by 1929, the year after she finished as president, there were 50 active junior clubs. 19 had joined that year. It was such a busy fall that Mrs. Sims took her car full of her executive committee down to a tea, an afternoon tea in Douglas, and they had their board of directors meeting in the car that day. I'm going to jump ahead to our 5th president, Mrs. Dowell. She managed to get railroad rates from all points of the state on the Santa Fe and or the Southern Pacific Railroad to get to the convention. The convention was in Tucson that year, and when they got there, the hotel rates were reduced. This is according, again, to the Arizona Republic. We were well covered by the newspaper. By the time we get to the 8th president, Mrs. Nelson, in 1934 and 1935, during the Depression, the number of clubs had dropped sharply. The luncheon at the Hotel Adams was 50 cents per person. I would also like to talk a little bit about Mrs. Pasco. She is also known and referred to as Mrs. Flaccus because she was married first to Mr. Flaccus, and when he died, she remarried. In 1939, the Federation presented 10 radio programs. She loved opera, and she loved working with young artists. She also founded the Tucson Symphony Women's Association in 1952, long after she'd been president of our Arizona Federation. She lived to be 97 years old. Mrs. Williams continued the interest in radio programs, but now when we get to Mrs. Newcomer, it's war years, and so things had to change. The Arizona Federation added a department called the Hospital and War Services. And this is when they would bring musical equipment to soldiers or veterans so they could enjoy music during the recovery or time down. In 1942, our Desert Music Club of Ajo raised $130, which in those days was a lot of money. And they furnished the Air Corps barracks with a radio, a phonograph, 100 records, a piano, and table decorations for their Christmas dinner with cakes, candy, ice cream, cookies for good measure. In Mrs. Nevin's reign of 46 to 50, the National Convention was in Dallas, Texas. And at that time, our own Tucson Boys Choir sang, and they were a hit. One of our 2 men presidents was Forrest Thornburg. He was trained classically in dance, and so when they were at the National Convention, he and his wife danced Psalm 148 at the White Breakfast, which is a memorial service. Mrs. Dick Hall, by her reign, there were 75 federated clubs, if you count the senior clubs, the student clubs, which means university, 40 junior clubs, choruses, and choirs. The Saturday Morning Musical Club of Tucson had weekly broadcasts, and one of their members additionally held weekly cultural events. The Phoenix Piano Teachers Association had a half-hour weekly programs over KOY. Mrs. John Tibbetts, and I have to thank her in a very personal way, wrote a book called A Perfect 36, The History of Arizona Federation of Music Clubs from 1920 to 1956. And this is where I got a lot of my information for the earlier presidents. The Parade of American Music won citations from the Veterans Hospital for the music performances in the field of therapy. Our 4-year institutes had opera productions, and that was at the University of Arizona, Tucson, ASU in Phoenix, NAU in Flagstaff, and University of Phoenix in Phoenix. I'll be just highlighting some of the other, and you can read along if you would like, what other presidents have been doing. In 1955, there were 13 senior clubs and 8 associate clubs. We go ahead and move on to Mrs. Charles Rasmussen, number 22, from Ajo. She was a very up-and-coming lady, and she and her husband would go to the national conventions, as most of our presidents do. She also became the first vice president of Western Region. Going on to number 24, Mrs. Stites. She celebrated the Golden Jubilee of the Musicians Club of Arizona. And I thought this was wonderful to see that the handbell ringers from Sun City performed then for our 50th anniversary, as well as they're performing today. And it's really a wonderful thing to know that organizations like the Handbells can go for 50 years. We get to Mrs. Charles Davis. She graduated from the University of Minnesota in physical education, history, with minors in geography and math. No music. She taught for 16 years in public school teaching, went into accounting. She was very active in the National Federation with many responsibilities, was moved to Anchorage, Alaska for 23 years. She worked as chief of fiscal at the U.S. Weather Bureau Regional Office. The reason I've been so interested in her is that she, Edith, and her sister-in-law, Irene Davis, left very generous monies to our AZFMC. For years, we have given scholarships to music students, especially in university and colleges, in piano and/or organ. After 40 years, we are getting very low on monies to continue this endeavor. We used to use the interest from the principal for the scholarships, but as you probably are aware, the interest rates have been extremely low, and in 2008, we lost some monies because of the recession. Mrs. Porter was former president of the Illinois Federation. We go ahead and we notice that Mrs. Catherine Carruthers from Ajo wrote an original operetta called Karmic Circus, which sounds like a lot of fun. We have some pictures of some of the following presidents: Mrs. Betty Farmer. We also have pictures of Margaret Seymour and Jan Lockett. I got to know Sharon Booker and Sharon Lockett when I was in Minnesota and going to the national conventions, as either a representative or a state president. I got to meet them. Sharon was really a hoot. Although she was totally blind, she loved cats, and she wrote many books, mystery books about cats. We went to visit Jean Baisley at her home in Sholo, and when she decided to move to Oklahoma, Faith Gossett, who you hear from on a recording today, came to our rescue, and she's a former president of Iowa. Next, we have Dave Lean as a president, their second male president, and he went into private teaching much later in life, but it turned out he loved it. Deb Weiser was from Prescott Valley. She moved to Alaska, and now she is federating Alaska. And finally, I'm your president now, and it's been wonderful working with all of you. I want to just talk a little bit about where we are going and how we are different. Our big goal in our federation is to promote American music. And I'm going to have showing just from our festival in piano all the American composers that are in the festival booklet for us to introduce to our young people. And Melody Bober has 85 pieces in it. So we'll get to hear a lot of her music. We are down in membership, but we are concentrating on our youth, on private lessons, festivals, theory, composition, improvisation, piano, voice, hymn playing, strings, patriotic and folk songs. Plus we have the Arizona Federation of Music Club Junior Superior Performance Awards, which you heard 9 of our young people this morning. We have several senior clubs. We have associate clubs, such as the Sun City Community Orchestra and the Handbell Ringers of Sun City. We offer wonderful insurance packages. We are reevaluating what we have learned through the pandemic. Heads up, in February, we will be having a virtual meeting or a workshop, which is overcoming stage fright. We are excited about the future, and we ask you to join us. We constantly need more volunteers, encouragers, musicians, teachers, performers, etc. Continue to join us the next 5 years, 20 years, 40 years, whatever is appropriate and comfortable for you. Thank you. We have a history of which we can be proud of. Let us not give up, but forge ahead. The best is yet to come, and the beat goes on.